Okay, good morning. I'm Kevin Egan, one of the board members for the WCS, and it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning, Dr. Chris Miller, who's Senior Global Research Director for Coatings and Resins at Arkema. Dr. Miller is a highly accomplished R&D leader with over 25 years of industrial experience in polymeric materials designed to improve performance of various different types of high-performance coatings. He also does functional materials and plastic applications. In his current role, he's responsible for the global R&D organization of Arkema Coatings, a greater than $1 billion business unit of Arkema Group. After graduating with a degree in chemical engineering from Drexel University, Chris went on to earn his PhD in chemical engineering from Lehigh University in 1994. Following his PhD, Chris completed a postdoctoral assignment at the University of Sydney before starting his industrial career at Union Carbide Corporation. Since that time, he has had the opportunity to be involved with a number of exciting projects and roles in R&D leadership, culminating in his current position. So please give a warm welcome for Dr. Chris Miller.
Okay, well, I saw that Bev left. I was going to tell her that none of us get dressed anymore because we're all working remotely, but I see that she walked outside the door. This is a great honor. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. I'm sure, like many of you, this is my first conference coming back, and to be invited here, Kevin, by the board, I really appreciate it. It feels normal. And it's strange to be saying that something feels normal, and hopefully this will be normal, but let's face it, the idea of what normalcy is going to change. The topic for today is sustainability. So why sustainability? Well, when I was thinking about topics, this was the one that immediately came to mind. After I chose the topic, I started to think, well, how are we going to present this? What are the different aspects of sustainability? So one of the things I did was just take a look at your presentations from this week. And what I found was about a quarter of the presentations talk about some aspect of sustainability. So either mention in the title the word sustainability, or words like bio-based, zero VOC, low VOC, eco-label, biodegradable. I think we can agree that all of these have something to do with sustainability. And in fact, I attended several talks yesterday that didn't have sustainability in the title. And those talks also immediately talked about either the company commitment to sustainable development goals or how the project objectives were dependent upon sustainable attributes happening in the world. So obviously this conference, we're talking a lot about sustainability. We're presenting on it, we're studying it, we're promoting it, so it's obviously an important topic. Furthermore, I'm going to share this with permission from Warren Boss. We had a digital coding days at Arkema in, I think it was in June. We asked them to present what they thought the key themes were for the coatings industry right now. And this is what they said. 3 different themes, one of which we know about, and that is the urbanization and rising middle class. So this is when people have more money, they buy more consumable goods. That's good for us. Another, which I think we can agree in looking at a lot of your mass faces, is COVID. What's going to happen post-COVID? How we're going to work, how we're going to paint, how we're going to order our materials, how we're going to solve our supply chain problems. This is obviously a theme. And right up there with that, they point out sustainability and climate change. So we're here talking about sustainability, and when we look at global trends, it's one of the 3 biggest. Interestingly, though, in their same presentation, they showed this slide. And this was a poll of you, people in the coatings industry, and they asked them, will consumers pay more for coatings? Now, of course, there's nuanced answers here. This is an oversimplification. But by and large, the answer continues to be no. So we have a challenge here. It's a major theme. We're all talking about it. We're spending research on it, research dollars on it, we're marketing it, but we still hear that consumers aren't going to pay more. Their conclusion is it's about 1 to 2% of the industry now, perhaps grow to 5 to 10% by 2025. That's a big number, but it still remains a niche. So this is kind of an issue for us. Major trends, people don't want to pay for it. But more problematic, we had a flash survey during our digital days. So we had 111 non-Arkema participants respond to this particular questions. And it was a variety of different functions, a lot of R&D people, some commercial people, this sort of thing. We asked them, what's the key sustainability challenge your company is facing? Half of them said either we're dealing with the regulatory aspects, which is an ongoing challenge. That's never going to go away. Or more tellingly, 26% said they're still trying to find the meaning. Still trying to define the meaning of sustainability. So I think we can all agree, sustainability is a major trend that consumers won't pay for, and we don't know what it means. And we have 25% of our talks here about sustainability. Okay, so that's my cold open, obviously. We're going to talk about this. I'm going to try to break this down for you a little bit. There are a lot of papers on this. There are a lot of different angles to this. I hope by the end of this, what I'll be able to present is sort of a comprehensive view of what it means, what are the different aspects, where are we as an industry, and what can we expect in the next 5 years. So let's start with what are we telling our stakeholders, and then we'll talk about some of the tools. We talk about life cycle analysis and this sort of thing, and then we'll get into innovation. What are we telling our stakeholders about sustainability? Well, there's an easy way to figure this out. Let's just go to some websites. That's how we find information these days. Google's a powerful tool, so I did that. If you look at corporate websites and ask the question, is there a link to sustainability? By and large, yes, there is. In fact, all the multinational raw material suppliers of Arkema would be in that category. Most of the multinational diversified coatings companies also have a direct link on their homepage, sometimes under corporate social responsibility, but most of the time on their homepage, that will take you right to what they want to say about sustainability. The regional players, and there's several of them in the room, not so much, but these are mostly, their web pages are mostly B2C, so they're trying to direct consumers to their products. So let's just take a look at what's on the multinationals' web pages. So if you go in there, you can dig around a little bit, and I'll use Arkema a little bit later by way of example to show you what I'm talking about. But by and large, what you see is this. The top 50% of the citations are basically the things that are typically associated with corporate social responsibility. And this is pretty important because a lot of large multinational companies are naming chief social responsibility, chief sustainability officers. So clearly there's an aspect of corporate social responsibility here. And when you dig in a little further, what you see is information on climate change, HES, health, environmental, and safety, how are our plants doing, information on products. But you also see a lot of things around diversity and inclusion, wellness and training, governance, all the things that we would commonly associate with corporate social responsibility. What I find is that when it comes to the product information, we're still searching a little bit. Normally there'll be a statement about innovation, and then there'll be some products that are listed, and there'll be a tie to sustainability, but it's not a forward-looking theme so much about what are the challenges we're trying to solve, and how do these products fit those challenges. Finally, I'm going to talk about this throughout the talk, and you're going to see these little icons. A lot of the corporate sites will have a link to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These were set forth in 2015 with objectives around 2030. And this is a way that a lot of companies are linking their activities. I'll show you some of these a little bit later as we go through this. So I think we can start to get an understanding of what the definition is here then. Sustainability is the intersection of sustainable development and corporate social responsibility, or maybe better said, sustainability is the goal of corporate social responsibility. And we could call it people, planet, and prosperity. So a lot of us are R&D people. We're going to be thinking about innovation. But you can't stop there. You have to keep on unpeeling the onion, going back further and further. How we purchase our raw materials is important, but how do we treat the people that we're working with? If we go to green solutions, are we cutting down rainforests? Are we treating the farmers well? All these things fit in. It's about this intersection, economy, society, and environment. And so companies, when you go to these websites, and I'll start with Arkema, but it doesn't really matter. Any of these large multinationals that have sustainability on their page are going to have something that looks like this. They're going to show their product programs. They're going to show it from the start, and start to talk about, about life cycle and circular economy, how we work with our suppliers for responsible sourcing. We talk about climate and environment. We talk about safety, diversity, community. And then lastly, we get to innovation. So I'll tackle that topic at the end. So this is sustainability. This is the definition of sustainability. Those definitions I put up earlier are actually published definitions for sustainable development goals and corporate social responsibility. So it's not really up for debate. I just think that sometimes we take a narrow perspective on it. How do we measure it, though? How do we know we're doing better? Well, there's a lot of tools that companies are developing. And some of these are becoming well established, and some of these are in their infancy. Most major companies have something that look like this. Arkema has 3 major transformation programs. One is called Archimedes, which is a portfolio sustainability assessment. I'll explain that in a little bit. One is on circular economy. So this is where you get into life cycle analysis. And the third one is about a climate plan. And this is a lot about our manufacturing assets and footprint, clean water, low energy, low waste, this sort of thing. I'm not going to talk about that one so much because I think this is a topic that's left for the manufacturing type of organizations. I'm going to talk a little bit about these two. Portfolio sustainability assessments is a pretty well-established tool. It's a way to look at all the products that a company makes and ask the questions of whether they contribute positively or negatively to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so the way this works, and this is an internal program, although aspects of this are published externally, you look at a subsegment of your products, you break it down pretty small so that you can actually tell what you're doing. You do an assessment of the products for minimum requirements around code of conduct, safety and hazards, economic contributions. This is the minimum requirement for our products. Obviously, we want everything to meet that, and if it doesn't, immediate actions need to be taken. Then you look at stakeholder requirements, and here you get into global regulatory trends across life cycle and market signals. That's a code for saying you look at the raw materials that we're selecting. Are there any substances of concern that we know about, or things that are emerging? Then we put action plans together on that. And then the last one, which is kind of the top of the pyramid, is how do these contribute to these UN Sustainable Development Goals? Are these contributing to clean water, clean land, infrastructure, all these different UN Sustainability Goals? The goals of companies that do this is to create action plans that can be built into the product development life cycle so that we can eliminate bad actors. Obviously, if there's something that doesn't meet the minimum requirements, we can take immediate action. And then to move ourselves in a positive direction that we can report to our shareholders and stakeholders. This is what Arkema would call Impact Plus. All this can be built into an R&D gate process, and this is the way we can measure ourselves and continually improve. The second tool I'll talk about, which I think likely there's some papers here this week, maybe you've seen some, it's a big topic, life cycle analysis. I've seen a lot presented on this. I would use a little bit of caution when you're looking at this data, because I've looked at it quite a bit. It's a very powerful tool, but we're just learning how to use it. It's a standardized way to look at the total life cycle carbon footprint of your products. Typically, companies do this in a cradle-to-gate manner. So when we talk about later the future, it's going to be about collaboration up and down the value chain. But mostly right now, we're just looking at cradle-to-gate. There are a number of different areas, and you can see them in here: climate change, ozone formation, air acidification, etc. All these things are rated, and then you get a relative assessment of your products, and you can do some comparisons. This can be done right down to a product level, but usually it's done on an aggregate level. So basically, we would take, for example, a production site, because at that production site, there's an average amount of energy used, etc., and you can apply it then to a family, like, for example, alkyd dispersions, acrylic latexes, vinyl acrylic latexes, etc. The type of data that I typically see is something that looks like this, and this is actually something that we did with EPDLA as a professional association. We participated with an independent third party on all European producers, looking at dispersions. So basically, Arkema put plant-specific information in, and we compare it to averages of the European chemical industry. And you get something that looks like this. You say, oh, okay, well, benchmark European producer SB looks like that, SA looks like that. I think that's pure acrylic, alkyd dispersion, vinyl acetate power VAE. And you can see Arkema looks pretty comparable, and we can draw some relative conclusions. And it's very tempting to really jump to some technical marketing story around this. But when you dig a little deeper, what you find is very, very small differences can contribute to very big changes in these graphs. And secondly, it's only one part of the value chain. So we're learning. We're beginning to use this data. We can draw relative comparisons, but we've got a ways to go here. Okay. So these are some of the tools we're using to measure. What about innovation? This is where I'm sure everybody will get very excited. This is where I get excited. I know I like that other stuff. It's interesting. We need to be able to use it. But this is what we're paid to do, solve problems. We tend to look at this into, I would say, 4 categories, but let's just group it into 2 subcategories that we need to tackle here. One is around product design, and then one is about product application and performance attributes. So, how do we design our products, and how do they perform in use? This is where the sustainable innovation goals come in. So let's start by talking about product design. 2 different areas here. One is what the survey told us of the 111 participants earlier. Boy, we're just so consumed with regulatory. That's the top piece. The second one is a hot topic. There'll be a lot of talks here this week. It's about, what about alternative feedstocks? Okay, what about that? What are we going to do about that? How can we incorporate these into our products? So let's start with the regulatory trends. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm sure that you're all consumed with this when those in this room aren't consumed with supply chain issues. These are the main ones that we're aware of, that we're working on. Alkyl-phenols, believe it or not, we still have some of these. Almost completely regulated out in Europe. In the US, we still use these materials. Biocide, does this sound familiar? We hear that biocides might be eliminated in Europe. It's going to be challenging in the US as well. PFAS. If you don't know what PFAS stands for, it's perfluoroalkyl substances or polyfluoroalkyl substances, depending upon which definition you read. If you don't know what this is, I highly suggest that you get familiar with this term. We can talk in the sidebar and I can explain a little bit more. This is a very serious issue, not so much for the coatings industry right now, but in the chemical industry in general. Highly regulated materials. Isocyanates, formaldehyde, heavy metals, all these things that we have to deal with. Not so exciting, but unfortunately, we need to upgrade our pricing with it. Okay. And then, of course, we also have this major technology trend, which has been going on for the past 30 years. Elimination of solvents. We can cast this back and show that waterborne, powder, UV, high solids have grown in the past. This data is from Warren Boss again. We expect these technologies to grow a lot faster. So when it comes to the regulatory aspect, we're talking about elimination of solvents and elimination of these substances of concern. How about alternative fossil fuels? Well, we see 2 major trends here. One is, and I see a lot of these talks this week, it's the development and commercialization of products based on biorenewable materials, and we do see some examples. Now, I just pulled these as examples, so if you see your product in here, I'm not making any claims about it. Just can go on the web and say who's saying that they have biorenewable content. We're starting to see some niche examples of products being introduced into the decorative coatings area. And I think this will grow, but we'll talk about some of the reasons it's going to grow slowly in a second. The second strong push, which I'm not going to talk too much about today, and might actually happen faster, is the recycling of materials, what's called upcycling. So, for example, taking PET, glycolysis techniques or depolymerization techniques, producing monomers, and then you can make a coating out of that. So again, this is reduction of use of finite resources. So 2 major trends that we see right here. Tough to say which will go faster. The second one I'm seeing a little bit more investment in, and I think we'll see some of that, especially in the polyester area, that will impact the coating business in the next 5 to 10 years. So let's talk more about Biobase, because I see a lot of talks on this. This is a chart I reproduced. It was actually from Kent West Group, and I think it was in Coatings Tech back in May. Lots of good articles coming out right now. It just talks about some of the sources of materials that can be used for raw materials for monomers and polymers that can eventually end up in coatings. You can see we have oils, starches, sugars, biomass. All these things can be used. They have a very detailed analysis of how they might be used. In some cases, they're actually being used directly as binders. So starches in some applications can be used to partially displace synthetic latex. In other areas, they're being used to create the monomers that then become the synthetic latex polymers. There are some complicating factors here, which I'll get down to the primary issues below. I would say that biomass, this is probably the one that shows the most potential, but it's also the one that's the most complicated, because it would be the chemicals that we need would be a side stream from making fuel oils. So why not use these? Well, there are a couple of issues. The primary issue, I would say, the economics aren't there. And we go back to the very first slide, or whenever it was, I said people don't want to pay for this. So that's a problem. But I think another issue is what I'll refer to generically as the greenwashing effect. We need to be careful about what we tell our consumers that are buying our products, and we need to make sure that we understand what it is and that we can stand behind it. 3 different areas here. One is the question about competition with food sources. Another is the full life cycle assessment. Okay, it's biomass, but when we look at this across the life cycle, how does that contribute to the sustainable attributes of it? And if we're not careful, we can actually do something that's less sustainable. The last one, and I'm just going to talk about this a little bit, is standardized measurements, which have been, I think we had some false steps in our industry, where we did some self-promotion about biorenewable and this sort of thing. And there's been some, I would say, disconnects with how we communicate. There are some standard ways of measuring this. They're starting to get more widely used. These are really the 2 basic categories. One is biocarbon content, and one is mass balance approach. Both of these are important. Both of these have a role to play as we go forward. How they're used, I would say that the biocarbon content is a certification approach, where materials are actually tested, they get certified, and it's something that can be put on a label. So they have a lot of commercial interest from the marketing and promotion directly to consumers. As it turns out, the USDA certified bio-based product is also spec'd in for some government contracts. The mass balance approach is not an approach where there's a direct measurement. This is an approach where there's an allocation of feedstocks across the value chain. So it's basically a bookkeeping approach. It allows us to measure what we do today accurately, communicate that across the value chain, so our suppliers can tell us how much biocarbon content, we can allocate that to our products and communicate to our customers. It doesn't have direct testing, and while you can get an ISCC certification, it doesn't say how much biomass is in there. So what this is mostly being used for right now is companies are setting these goals, like I showed earlier. This allows us to more accurately measure the life cycle of our products. This one, I think, on the right is going to go a lot faster in our industry. You're going to see major investments and announcements about that. Many companies have already done it. But the one on the left I get asked a lot about. Which products have biocarbon content, which ones can get certified. I'm going to talk about some of the different ones now. Just some examples here, but you can find other ones. We have the additives, and then we have the resins and binders. Here's a few examples. This is from our Coatex business. You can find thickeners, dispersants, rheology modifiers, although I don't show it here. There are examples of plasticizers, surfactants, all these different types of materials. These materials are going to be inherently bio-based. So they're going to be traceable, and it's going to be possible to get USDA certifications based on known biocarbon content that can be measured. In terms of binders, I'll just show a few of them. Alkyd emulsions, we know a lot about those. It just turns out in this case, we actually have the USDA certification of some products in our Sardimer line, Sarbio products. You'll get a little certificate there that tells you the actual amount. The Sinagua, we actually have the measurements, and we're just waiting on the certification. So these materials are inherently bio-based. They can be used for the USDA certification. Someone can put that in the label and directly market to the consumer and sell it for government contracts. The one that I'm asked about the most is synthetic latex. So what about acrylics? Okay, so in principle, no problem, right? I mean, there are routes to acrylic acid. You know that. Arkema had a route to it. There's a route for fermentation, so we know we can get there. And then there are bio-based alcohols from sugar starches, other natural materials. So why does it go faster? Well, there's a couple of challenges here. The economics aren't favorable. We're back to that. But moreover, this industry has been around for a long time. And foundationally, we have debottlenecked our supply chain to get materials from multiple sources. So if you're talking about a tank of ethanol, for example, that might be used for ethyl acrylate, that's a gigantic tank that's getting material from multiple sources. To say how much of that is bio-based, okay, I can do that by a mass balance approach. But then to guarantee the amount of ethanol in there from a other than mass balance approach, a measurement approach, our monomers people describe that as a nightmare. A nightmare. So this is why synthetic latex is going to go a little slower and it's going to remain niche. There are supply chain nuances that have to be solved, and there's going to have to be investments made. My view is that what will happen first is the mass balance approach, which allows us to measure what we do today. That will require the upstream will get the information. It could be directly digitally communicated by an enterprise system, put on a COA, whatever. Then our companies can start to collaborate up and down the supply chain, put more pressure on the downstream. Give me more of this, give me more of this. More demand means more investment, and we'll solve that problem. In the meantime, okay, we'll get the mass balance approach, we'll see niche products, and you'll see a lot of this, and I'm seeing a lot of this. There are materials today where we're blending acrylics with alkyds, this type of thing, and they actually meet the USDA requirements. We just never get the certification. You're going to start to see products that you've seen in the past. All of a sudden, they're going to appear with a certification because people are understanding and communicating a lot more. So this is what I see here. Okay, let's talk about application properties. This is kind of the last part of my talk, and then I'm going to move into just forward-looking vision. I wouldn't call myself a futurist here. I'm going to stay pretty pragmatic. We see two different areas. One is energy intensity. Okay, energy is a premium. Energy is a primary resource, right? Most of it is petrochemical derived. Well, we're trying to find alternative ways to conserve it. And then there's sustainable performance attributes. All these different things that bring extra value. Okay, longer service life? Sure. Does it last longer? Can we use fewer codes? What about recycling? What about end of life? What other things can we do? So these two areas. Just a couple of examples here. Let's talk about energy intensity to give you an idea. 3 different areas. Just starting from the left, okay, so we have some processes that are pure and coating line. That takes energy. If we can do it with less energy, okay, that's favorable. So, for example, LED cure instead of UV cure. That faster, more efficiently, bring other properties. That brings value. What about electric vehicles? Well, Arkema is a diversified chemical company. We're making major investments in electric vehicles. Lots of different lightweight materials, lots of materials for lithium-ion batteries. We have lithium-ion fluids. We have the PVDF type of polymers, Kynar. All these materials go in there. But what you start to see, and these are just a couple of articles that I clipped from the headlines, companies that we traditionally associate with coatings, here I just put PPG and Axalta because they just happen to have recent announcements that I can pull from the headlines, are talking about their investment in electric vehicles, and they're specifically their investments in batteries. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, they see the writing on the wall. This is a mega trend. This is going to grow. There's a need for materials. It's not so different from the traditional coatings we use. There are binders, there are coatings, and so they're making major investments in another area. How about energy efficiency in our homes? Going to be a lot of that. Okay, I just have one example here. I think Mun Lee is going to talk a little bit later about the new elastomeric binder that we have. You can see her talk a little bit later, but Cool Roof is an example, pretty well established. This is a reflective type of roof coating. It's been proven to reduce energy. And so, you can think of all the different ways that we could have insulating materials, building materials, more efficient building materials, more efficient coatings, reflective coatings, insulated coatings. all these different types of materials, all around energy intensity. What about other application performance? Okay, the sky's the limit here. I said I'm not a futurist, but I'll just give you an example. End of life, recyclability. Okay, yeah, definitely a trend. We've got the full circular economy here, so we can't just think about the raw materials we source, the binders that we make, the applications we do, but think about what happens at the end. And you start to see some people looking at this. Here's an example recently about recycling paint. There was an interesting couple of papers at the European Coating Show. We got the reprints of these where they're looking at separating a binder from a textile material, little backpacks, so they can pull them apart and then recycle both the different materials. And they claimed in there that there are applications for other types of coating materials. You got microplastic contamination. We don't hear about this, but this is a massive problem for the world. Mostly in the PET area, where we get these microplastics accumulating in the environment. Well, paint's also a contributor. Marine paints could be a contributor. How do we solve that problem? How do we recycle it? How do we recover it? Can we get it to break down? Well, we don't want it to break down too soon because we put it on the ship to stop it from corroding, right? So how do we solve that problem? Healthy living, lots of this. We can debate how the merits of this, whether it works or doesn't work. But when you see companies like, I think I have Volkswagen, and I think it's Converse, these are high consumer cachet, and they make large announcements about these things, about how they're painting their buildings so they absorb pollution. Well, that's going to drive consumer interest. That's in our best interest. When they start talking, it benefits us. Now, we have to make sure they work, or else we run back into the greenwashing effect. We can't get out ahead of ourselves. So these are the types of things I see. So let me just conclude with this. Where is this all heading? Okay, so sustainability is nothing new. I mean, we go back decades and decades. It's always been about eliminating solvents, eliminating hazardous materials. What's happening right now? Well, there is a lot of investment, a lot of money coming in right now. And where there's investment, there's going to be research, and there's going to be investors that are going to be looking for startups and this sort of thing. So this is going to accelerate. This isn't slowing down. We're just at the beginning. We've got these UN sustainability goals taken on face value. We have 8 years, 2030. So companies, that's going to be driven a lot by the private sector. So these companies are going to be making major announcements, major investments to try to hit some of these goals. And you're also going to see, and what I find now is there are parts of different organizations that understand different aspects of sustainability. I mentioned at the beginning, if I talk to a sustainability officer, they're probably going to talk to me about their climate goals. If I talk to somebody in marketing, they're going to want to know, how do I get this in somebody's hands? R&D, so I'm trying to solve all these different challenges. It's got to be fully integrated into all of our activities. And we're going to start to speak a common language. More and more, we're going to start to understand these terms, understand how they can be used. Quantification, life cycle analysis, we're going to be able to use that data. It's going to start to be available when you purchase a product. You're going to be able to understand what you're purchasing in terms of its life cycle analysis, how much biocarbon content it is. You're going to be able to then communicate it to your customer. And as we do this, it's going to accelerate. So this common language around the certifications I talked about today, we're all going to have a better understanding of this. Better understanding means better communication. Better communication means educating consumers. So we're going to be able to basically stand behind some of our commitments and promises. And the last one here, partnerships across the value chain. We can't solve this. Arkema can't solve this. Our customers can't solve it. Our partners upstream can't solve it. We can only solve this if we all work together. It has to be investment at all parts of the value chain. The communication has to be consistent. We have to be clear in what our deliverables are. And we really need to, I would say, live the commitments of it. It's a changing world. I didn't even talk about there are predictions about when our finite resources will run out. Forget about that. They will run out. We're going to have to be able to educate people, accelerate this, and work together to solve some of these problems. I will say, I started by saying consumers won't pay for this, but I should probably finish by saying shareholders are paying for this. Companies that are doing this well are getting rewarded in their share price. This is why you have things like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. and you have some funds set up that are around sustainability, that's going to go faster. So even if consumers don't get it yet, there's going to be money on the front end. It's going to come from direct investment from the government. It's going to come from shareholders. So companies that do this well are going to grow faster than those that don't. But none of us can solve it independently. Okay, so when's the consumer sentiment going to come? I don't know. The consumer sentiment is there. Consumers want it. They demand it. They're not ready to pay for it. My view is it'll grow steadily, and if we do it right and communicate and educate and don't have a bunch of false starts where we say something and it's perceived as greenwashing, because I think the media is always out to find out, does the chemical company care? It's just the whole principle of responsible care, transparent communication. If we do it right, it will come. And so that's my talk today. I appreciate your attention. I really enjoyed this. I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I'm happy to take it.
If you have a question, raise your hand. You got a mic. Go over your room.
Chris, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I agree with your conclusion about the common language and definition of terms. Because when I think of sustainable, for example, as long as the sun keeps burning, we're going to have photons of energy that give you sustainable energy that way. When the earth keeps spinning, we'll always have wind energy, right? And as tides keep coming along, we'll always have hydrodynamic energy. So I think sometimes the industry gets confused with terminology, with biobase, recyclable, green, clean, all that sort of stuff. So I think we can all do ourselves a favor. We really define these terms specifically to our industry, and then everybody's on the same page with that.
I find that more and more because I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of coatings companies and peer companies, and depending upon who you're talking to in that company, they will go down different angles of it. But it's a big picture here. It really has to all fit together. So thank you for your comment.
Thanks. Chris agreed. Excellent presentation. And I would say our organization 100% agrees with the way you framed it. With one clarification, consumer sentiment and demand from the consumer. Could you comment on regional differences? We see Europe maybe being more driven by an awareness of sustainability. U.S., we're starting to get it. Asia, a bit behind. Would you agree with that, or would you?
I would say it this way. Consumer sentiment is strongly behind sustainability. Consumer wallets, not so much. When we think about healthy living and clean living, surprisingly, China is one that, really wants that. I mean, they live their daily life in, smog, and we know about the recent shutdowns of the industry. Now, do they have the money to do it? When we talk about the regulatory environment, Europe's been a little bit more ahead of the U.S., and I think that the consumers have been educated a little bit more, and will pay a little bit more for that. I probably should separate consumer sentiment, though, from consumer wallet. I think broadly, consumers would love it if everything was green and Biobase and they trusted it. But that right now, I'm not sure that they trust that. And if we had solutions for them that they trusted and had performance, maybe they'd pay a little bit more. But it's going to take a lot. But certainly there are regional differences. But I would say, I really see it in China, where they really want the healthy living. I wouldn't mind. Like Wenjin, she's been to China with me many times. I see one question way in the back also. Okay, this one.
One question I have is you were mentioning cradle to gate. Why not cradle to grave? That's something consumers would get behind more.
Yeah, but we have to, this is right back to partnerships, right? Once we understand and we have a common language and we can measure our cradle to gate, that information can be passed along down the value chain. So this is the critical thing, right? How does my product perform inside the gate? Now I talk to you, you're buying my product, you trust my data, We have a common language. Maybe it's on a shared digital platform. It comes with a COA. Now you build it into your Cradle gate, and right on down the value chain. Now we have a full view of what the life cycle is. Now we can do it now. And people do it now. I've seen a lot of academic papers on this. I've seen some commercial papers on this where a product being promoted, they show cradle to grave type of analysis. Certainly it can be done. But to do it on a mass scale, we really need to have each piece of the value chain able to perform it at a common language and then share it. And that's coming. That's coming. Some companies are ahead of others. Some of them already have it done and can communicate it digitally. So I would say Arkema is in the middle. We're in the learning phase.
A comment more than a question. While consumer sentiment may not be there, I think business sentiment is. In non-market, we have won contracts to paint entire university systems, and the largest stadium in the country, for instance, selected specifically because of our targets and the actions we've taken in sustainability and sort of commitment to ESG. So the consumer wallet may not be there, business wallet, developer wallets, and all those even luxury properties that want to boast about the use of materials in their buildings, they're all behind us as far as I'm concerned.
Totally agree. And government contracts are being spec'd out that way. You have institutional investors, private investors that are putting money into it. For sure, from a business standpoint, we're seeing strong support from this. And again, yesterday I sat through a couple of talks that didn't even mention it. One of them right at the start talks about how important it is to their business and their goals. And, it is, the businesses are behind it. And there is money here. Maybe the money is upfront seed money to do the investments. And we just need to bottleneck the downstream to find the value. But when you think about the value, solving some of these problems where you talked about energy, where you can communicate it, healthy living, recyclability, there's probably a ton of value there. We need to develop more of those types of applications. People can point to that and say this coating has that property. It's more around the materials that we choose, I think, the biorenewable piece, where it's still a little tricky for a customer to say, yeah, okay, if it doesn't perform as well, and I have to pay $1 more for a gallon of paint, I don't know. So, agree with your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I do have a question. Not sure if you can share with us more on that. So, of all these sustainability initiatives, and how do you guys quantify that? Especially when it refers to, you need to rely on data outside your own organizations. Any sources or experience that you can share with us on that?
Yeah, so this is back to where I showed the 3 transformation programs that we have at Arkema. We have the life cycle analysis tools that we use, and we have goals around how many of our products will complete life cycle analysis. We have goals around biorenewable content. And these are things that we can measure. We have standard ways of measuring it. I mentioned the product sustainability assessments. Life cycle analysis and product sustainability assessments are standard tools. They're standard methods, so they can be shared. Product sustainability assessments are pretty down in the weeds, so they're not so much shared. You can imagine there's a lot of proprietary information there. Then you can just go to any company's annual report, and you'll see all kinds of information there about how they measure their environmental impact of the production facilities in terms of resource management, water, energy, waste. So there are standard tools that are being used. I think, again, and back to my point, maybe we don't have a standard language yet. We haven't educated yet. And so I think that that's got to develop a little bit more. If you look at the multinationals, though, they'll all have something that looks very much the same. They're all doing more or less the same thing by more or less the same methodologies. We're just not able to fully communicate it in a way that everybody can understand. This is the same thing. This is how you use this information. This is where you need to be cautious. And this is where we're going to go next, which of course leads to how do we partner to get there.